Hello everyone, Melinda Jennison here at Streamline Property Buyers, and I've got another market update report for Greater Brisbane that I'm going to be sharing with you today. First of all, just looking at a snapshot of what's been happening here in the Greater Brisbane market. Listing volumes year on year down 11.1%. That's total listings. We've got auction clearance rates across the month of March that were sitting at 64.7%. Buyer activity is still high, especially for quality properties and especially in that unit and townhouse market in near city locations. House values across the month of March shifted 1.1%, and unit values shifted 1.5% over the month. Gross yields for all dwellings sitting at 3.9% here in Brisbane. First of all, we're going to be looking at listing volumes. Now you can see total listing volumes here. They are higher again in March than they were back in February. So year on year, we're looking at a reduction of 11.1% in total listings. However, between February and March, there were actually 11.1% more total properties available for sale. So that's reassuring for buyers that have been in the market waiting for more stock to appear. What was exciting for many buyers throughout March was we did see an uptick in new listings become available. So between February and March, we actually saw 9.5% more new listings become available month on month. So that was actually quite reassuring. So total listings, however, compared to the long-term average, still well and truly below where we usually sit, still about 30 to 35% below the long-term listing volume. So that's an indication of supply in the market. And obviously we have to weigh that up against the demand in the market to see what direction property prices are moving. Sales volumes, it is an indication of demand. We've got an increase of 4% or 4.4% year on year in the 12 months to the end of March 2024 here in Brisbane. So definitely more sales activity in the market, which is an indication of demand. Buyer demand is definitely still strong. So auction clearance rates, you can see there between January, February and March, we've seen auction clearance rates ease very slightly. However, throughout the 4 weeks of March, we saw auction clearance rates sitting at 64.7%. Now, according to Apollo Auctions data as well, Brisbane saw an average of 3.7 registered bidders per auction in March. That was compared to 4 registered bidders per auction throughout February. So even though we saw a slight reduction in the number of registered bidders per auction, we actually saw an increase in the number of registered bidders who actively participated in the auctions. In March, it was 60.8%. That was up from 56.03% in February. So it does confirm that buyer activity in the market remains strong and there is still a heavy imbalance between buyers and sellers. Days on market, that's an indication of the speed of the market. 16% lower than last year. So we are a much faster moving market here in Brisbane compared to 12 months ago. Let's have a look at dwelling values as a whole. So dwelling values across the month of March in Brisbane increased 1.1%. That's a 3% quarterly change and an annual change of 15.9%. Now, dwellings, of course, that's made up of both units, townhouses and houses. So it's mixing all sales together. Median values for dwellings in Greater Brisbane continue to escalate above the median value for Melbourne. And in fact, the median value for Brisbane is now approaching the median value for Canberra. However, it is important to note this is due to compositional bias because in Melbourne, there are actually more units that contribute to that median value. So when we look at house data and unit data, you will still discover that in Brisbane, house median values and unit median values are still lower here in Brisbane compared to Melbourne. So don't be concerned when you hear the media talk about the fact that Brisbane property prices are now more expensive. They're always talking about dwelling values, and it is important to break down that data to really understand it. Looking at the PropTrack data, it shows the same trend where we saw an increase of 0.41% monthly growth in dwelling values across the city, so positive growth, and annual growth according to PropTrack for all dwellings sitting at 12.9%. Let's have a look at that segmentation of property values now. So you can see in the 3 months up to the end of February compared to the 3 months up to the end of March, there's been a small shift in where the growth is occurring. In the top 25% of property values, they were sitting at 2.3% quarterly growth up to the end of February. That's now dropped to a 2% quarterly growth rate in the top end of the market. So that segment of the market appears to be slowing down in terms of the rate of growth. When we're looking at the middle segment of the market, we were at 3.2%. Now we're at 3.4%. So that's growing a little faster. And the bottom 25% of property values was sitting at 3.8%. That's now at 4%. So again, we're starting to see a shift in price movement towards the bottom end of the market. What I will say is that this includes all dwellings data. So it is made up of both units and townhouses and houses. So we must consider what's happening in each market segment to determine why we're seeing that bottom end push up. As you will see during this presentation, there's been a lot more movement in the unit market than the housing market, so that must be considered when interpreting this data. Let's look at dwelling values across the last 12 months in terms of how Brisbane's comparing to the national average for capital cities elsewhere. As you can see there, Brisbane sitting in second place at 15.9% growth over the last 12 months, second behind Perth. So from a performance perspective over the last 12 months, Brisbane has definitely been an outperformer compared to the national average. Other markets, including Hobart, Darwin and Canberra, have had very little change in property values over the last 12 months. So this is evidence that Australia is certainly not a single property market. In the last 3 months, that's looking at the quarter up to the end of March, we can see there that Brisbane's in third place in terms of dwelling value changes behind Perth and Adelaide. So still outperforming the national average in terms of capital city price changes. Let's have a look at house value changes now. So here in Brisbane, over the month of March, we saw an increase of 1% throughout the housing market at a median value level. Quarterly growth for housing sitting at 2.8%. And annual growth now sitting at 15.9%. Now, I pointed out previously Brisbane's median house value sitting at $909,988, which is still lower than Melbourne, Sydney and Canberra. I will also point out that this month, the end of March, we have seen Brisbane median house values exceed or surpass that $900,000 price point for the first time in history. So we are in new territory here in Brisbane in terms of median house values. The PropTrack data also shows the same positive price growth trend throughout the month of March, with growth sitting in Brisbane at 0.38% and annual growth for housing recorded by PropTrack at 12.82%. Now let's look at the unit market here in Brisbane. You'll see at a monthly, quarterly and annual comparison, units have outperformed the house market here in Brisbane. Monthly growth for March is sitting at 1.5% in this segment of the market. Quarterly growth sitting at 4.1% compared to 3.8% in the house market. And annual growth in the unit segment of the market is sitting at 16.4% compared to 15.9% in the house part of the market. So the units segment of the market here in Brisbane has really outperformed the national average. In fact, it's 3 to 4 times better performance here in Brisbane compared to elsewhere. So if you're invested in units in Brisbane, we're not talking all units having the same level of performance, but quality investment grade units have really seen some high competition levels, and we're certainly still seeing a strong demand on the ground for this type of product across the city. Here you can see the median value for a unit in Greater Brisbane is now sitting at $587,793. For the first time, the median unit value in Brisbane has now surpassed that exists in Canberra for units. However, Brisbane median unit values still remain lower than both Melbourne and Sydney. So something to keep in mind, as I said earlier, even though the median dwelling value for Brisbane is now higher than Melbourne, both the unit price and the house price at a median value level are still below Melbourne's median unit and house price. Looking at PropTrack data, so you can see PropTrack shows the same positive rate of growth across the month for units with 0.58% growth recorded and 13.37% annual growth recorded by this data house. Looking at property value changes over the last few years since January 2020, anything above the line there represents a positive rate of property growth on a monthly basis. Anything below the line represents negative growth. The dark lines are house values and the light blue lines are unit values. So you can see we really did see some short, sharp falls throughout 2022 as interest rates started to escalate. That really did impact the housing market much more so than the unit market here in Brisbane. Of course, in March last year, we started to see the market turn around very rapidly. And since then, the unit market has simply outperformed the house market. And we've seen positive and strong growth in both segments of the market, despite units surging slightly ahead. Let's look at vacancy rates. This is an indication of what is happening in the rental market here in Brisbane, and it is an indication of supply levels of rental properties. So throughout the month of March, vacancy rates, according to SQM research, sitting at 1%. That's up slightly from 0.9% in February, but still well below the long-term average across the city. And this is what is putting upward pressure on those prices for rents because there's very little to rent, especially in certain pockets around the city. House rents have now increased 7.6% in Brisbane over the last 12 months. Now, this annual rate of growth in the housing part of the rental market is slowly increasing again. So we're starting to see some more momentum in the rate of growth on an annual basis. This has been occurring since January this year. So it indicates that tenants are actually continuing to experience difficulty in securing a property because of supply shortage, and they're starting to pay more to rent a house across Greater Brisbane. Unit rents are actually up 11.2% over the last 12 months up until the end of March. Now, the rate of growth in unit rents has eased slightly over the last 3 months, although the growth in unit rents does remain higher on an annual basis than growth in house rents. So those looking for units, the rate of growth is starting to ease, but still well and truly above the rate of growth for houses here in Brisbane. When we look at gross yields in the housing market here in Brisbane, gross yields are sitting at 3.6% based on median house values and median rents for Brisbane. And for units, the median gross yield is sitting at 5% here in Brisbane. Looking at a summary, Brisbane's rate of growth is starting to re-accelerate. In the last 3 months up to the end of February, we thought that the rate of growth was slowing down. However, this month's data in March confirms that we've had a further re-acceleration in the rate of growth. Brisbane is the second highest has the second highest rate of growth over the last 12 months in terms of capital cities around Australia, and it's had the third highest growth rate over the last 3 months for capital cities around Australia. So it's well and truly ranking above the national average in terms of price growth at the moment. Units and townhouses are outperforming houses. That is at a monthly rate, a quarterly rate, and an annual rate of growth. And it is also in terms of the rental increases that have been occurring over the last 12 months. Brisbane remains a market where there is low supply, as evidenced by listing volumes compared to the long-term average, and there's high demand. Now, that demand is evidenced by people turning up and lining up to get into homes. And we do expect that at some stage later in 2024, as interest rates perhaps start to ease, that we might see a resurgence in the demand for properties here in Brisbane. So that imbalance between supply and demand continues to put upward pressure on prices. If you're wanting to connect with us here at Streamline Property Buyers to understand what your budget will buy, to invest in Brisbane or to purchase your home in Brisbane, scan this QR code. You can book a call with our team. Alternatively, there's lots of free resources that we do provide to you as a consumer that you have access to through this link. We hope this has been a useful market update. As always, we'll be in touch again next month. Thank you for your time and bye for now.